It's Inspiration Thursday, and today's guest is a podcaster, storyteller, who believes in creating spaces where people are heard, valued, and appreciated. The host of Overcoming Odds podcast, Oleg Lougheed. We'll be right back.
Welcome to Her Business, Her Voice, Her Conversation. This podcast was created for the boomer woman leaving corporate, and now you're looking to reinvent yourself, become an author, an entrepreneur, a podcaster. Well, each episode will leave you with clarity. You will come away with the yes, I can and yes, I will reinvent myself mindset. So come on, let's do this. I'm your host, Margot Levette.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Another episode, Her Business, Her Voice, Her Conversation. Well, today, and let me adjust my mic. I am so anxious to get into this conversation. I just want to make sure that you hear me, see me, and have the same experience with the guest that I have today. He did a TED Talk, yes, and it's fabulous. After this conversation, you're going to have to be sure to YouTube it. Did a TED Talk on how to overcome your odds. And don't we all have odds to overcome? He's the podcaster of the Overcoming Odds podcast. He has 256 episodes banked. Yes, they are out there for you to just binge listen to. So I could go on and on and on, but we only have 30 minutes and this gentleman is just miraculous. I'm talking about podcaster creator Oleg Lougheed. Eric, thank you for joining me today.
No, thank you. Thank you for creating the space and everything that you do. I'm a huge believer in being able to create spaces where people are heard, valued, and appreciated. And I think that's something that you embody within your own life and how you show up. And so I just want to applaud you and appreciate you for who you are and all that you've done.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And I think it's coming from kindred spirits because when I think about Overcoming Odds podcast, and all it takes is one to listen to a couple of episodes and you understand that you are a gentleman with a story. It all comes from a story, connecting it to a person, a body, a person, so that that person can push it out into the world. Our stories are not our own. Is that what I hear you say in a nutshell, Oleg?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the biggest things that I've realized about my life is that for so many different chapters of my own journey to begin with, whenever I was asked, what is your story? The story that I kept telling was the story of my childhood adversities and childhood experiences. And when I would ask a similar question to the person sitting across from me, they would oftentimes say that they didn't have a story or they didn't have a similar story. And what I began to realize within my own journey is that, in my opinion, there is an overarching concept of a larger story, but there's also a story within that story. There's a story that took place yesterday. There's a story that took place an hour before this conversation. There's a story that took place a year before this conversation. All of these are stories. And that's what I try to create as far as the space goes, is an opportunity for people to understand that there are stories within their larger story. And just because you haven't experienced the challenges that I experienced at a relatively young age, it doesn't mean that you don't have a story of your own. All it means is that you have a story with your own set of obstacles and your own set of challenges in life. And that's the biggest thing that I try and create and share with other people, is that everyone does have a story, and everyone has a story that's unique to who they are and what they've experienced. And I think it's beautiful. I think it's beautiful to have people in life who haven't experienced the same exact things, because what it allows me to do is, in hearing other people's stories, it creates a perspective for me. It gives me an opportunity to look at my own life and my own circumstances as not the ultimate thing to life, but rather just an element of it. Here's an experience that I went through, and here's an experience that you went through. They might be different due to the events that we went through, but the beauty of it is that they can create a perspective for me. and allowed me to understand my own life and appreciate life through a lens that I may or may not have had a chance to do so before.
I'm writing that down, creating a perspective. And that's what we all have to do, especially this comes to me, especially after the pandemic, create a perspective. And in creating that perspective, it's embracing other people in a deeper level, hearing them, seeing them. Oleg, do you find that this creating these perspectives goes, it has to be global. We can't just stay in our own zip code, peek over the fence in our own backyard. We have to go global on what's happening in everyone's lives. Yesterday, this same hour. What's your take on that?
So I look at it through a couple of different lenses. I think the first perspective that I understood within my own life is that in order for it to be global, I think it has to be internal to begin with. And that is, in order for the conversation to be shared on a global scale, I think there has to be a conversation that takes place within the individual to understand what is it that we're actually discussing. One of the biggest reasons, or one of the biggest challenges that I've come across is, I remember there were times when I would have conversations before having a conversation with myself, with other people, and it became that much harder for me to understand the topic at hand. I think when it comes to, for example, if one of the topics that we're choosing to discuss is acceptance, I'm a huge believer that you can't give somebody something that you don't have yourself. So if I don't accept myself to begin with, and if I don't understand what that feeling actually looks like internally, how can I ever give that to anyone else? How can I ever create a space of acceptance for any other individual if I don't understand acceptance myself to begin with? If I don't understand a space where I don't feel judged, if I don't understand a space where I feel like I belong, if I don't understand a space where I feel like I'm heard, how can I ever create those opportunities for others? So I think the step that I choose to take before taking these conversations on a global scale is to approach them internally. Ask myself the difficult questions. What does it mean to be honest? What does it mean to be dishonest? When has both of those situations served me, and in what ways? See, I think what I've realized ultimately about life is that I don't believe there's a black or white. I think the world is gray. I think everything about this world is gray because it's all a matter of interpretation. Okay. You and I can look at the same exact object. We can read the same exact sentence and yet have varying perspectives and varying views on it. Now, the question there is who's right and who's wrong. The reality is neither one, because every single one of us sees it according to the lens that we have today. You might read a book later today, or you might have a conversation with someone later today or tomorrow or in the upcoming weeks that may help you shift that view. It may help you develop a different perspective, different viewpoint of that particular instance. So therefore, the truth that you have today may change moving forward. And that's where I believe that I think there's a direct connection to your show and everything that you've done, is I'm a huge believer that everything in life is temporary. Nothing is permanent. I think that same thing applies to one's values, one's character, how they approach life, their version of truth, because all of those things can be impacted and they can be influenced on a daily basis. Now, I remember I was having a conversation with one of my friends, and one of the things she had mentioned in the conversation was that all of these things might change, but the core values always stayed the same. Well, I left that conversation really thinking about what she had said, and I can't say that I necessarily just subscribe to that theory. And the reason why is because throughout my own life, the values that I had when I was 13, 14, and 15 are drastically different values than I have today at 28 years old. So that there's something to be said about it that I think, in my opinion, I'm always in transition. I never stop. I'm always embedded in this concept of change. So therefore, the only thing that I try to do about it is to be an active participant within that change.
I should have warned everyone that this young man must have lived at least 2 other lifetimes, because your perspective and how you present it to everyone, you can't hold on to your old core values and listen to you or listen to any of your episodes, because they do provoke one to think outside of the box, the black, the white. And you do have to enter into that other, maybe he has a point, or something, that intuition, that thing inside of you. It's like you have a way of just pulling that out of a person. And what you say, what your perspective or what you present is, that's very possible. Yeah. So let's not hunker down on what I think I hear you say is, let's not cheat ourselves and hunker down on one thought. Let's keep ourselves wide open, because there are other perspectives. There are other lenses to look through that very well may enhance your life, give you a full, rich life that you've been waiting for anyway.
And I think, to expand upon what you said, I really love this concept that you mentioned, as far as not being able to be identified by one particular thing or one particular thought, is because what I've experienced through my journey is that in moments when I chose to do that, I set limitations for myself. And that's the biggest thing that I've been able to, one of the biggest things that I've been able to discover about my own journey, is the number of limitations I set on myself on a daily basis. Even have done the work that I have for the past 8 to 10 years and read the numerous books that I have that help me create a path towards breaking and recognizing those limiting beliefs, I still face them on a daily basis. In fact, what I've realized is that every new endeavor brings its own set of limitations with it. So these concepts of limitations, I don't believe they ever stop, which for me helped me look at my work from a broader perspective. When I think about this concept of overcoming, to me, it used to mean eliminate. It used to mean get through a particular thing. What I've realized after a while, and it directly relates to this concept of having one thought and then living in the possibility where there are multiple thoughts around it, is now when I think about overcoming, I think about redefining your relationship with it. I think about a concept that I don't believe it's possible to eliminate. I mean, when you really think about your own journey, and for anyone that's listening right now, how can you ever completely eliminate depression, anxiety, stress, all of these other things that I believe are with me each and every single step of the way? So what I've realized is that it's in my best advantage to try and redefine my relationship with those concepts, because they're always going to be there. Okay. The stress that I might have experienced 5 or 10 years ago may not be the same stress today, but it's still stress. It's still anxiety. It's still depression. It's still loneliness. It's still a lack of belonging, and still all of these things. And so that's what I realized an important element. And it's exactly as you had said previously, being open-minded to other possibilities, being open-minded to other ways of thinking, and understanding that there is no ultimate thing to anything, in my opinion. If anything that I've learned, it's all a continuum. Yes. It's all from one step to the next, to the step beyond that, and to the step beyond that. I don't think I ever reach the top of that staircase. I think if anything, reaching. Exactly. If anything, I just keep finding the step beyond and the step beyond that. And that's where I think there's a beautiful thing, or maybe it's a form of a mindset that I choose to remind myself of, is that whatever the thoughts I'm experiencing right now, I'm not defined by them. These are thoughts amongst many other thoughts that I could experience today, tomorrow, in the upcoming weeks. And that is a big, big thing that I've learned along this journey, is to not limit myself in the way that I choose to think on a daily basis.
That's huge. That knocks down that imposter syndrome that haunts and halts so many people. I hear you say, and I love how you draw us into having a relationship with ourselves, allow ourselves to fall in love with ourselves, accept ourselves, and then present ourselves to the world. Also, I find it intriguing, depression, anything that is a part of us. Find a way to have a relationship with it. I never heard a person put it in that context. The way I felt about myself when I was 12 is definitely not the way you feel about yourself when you're 65. And, it's just, this is wonderful conversation. Do not let those things hold you. You find a way to have a relationship with everything that happens to you. Is that what I hear you say, Oleg?
Yes, and the other thing that I'll tag on to it is when I started to look at my life and all the things that make up who I am today, and I started to evaluate the relationships that I had with each one, I kid you not, my life became simpler. And what I mean by that is because I think I felt a lot more in tune with life rather than being an observer of life. I was actually a participant of it. And I think for however many years, I misunderstood this concept of what does it mean to have a relationship with self. In fact, I remember one of the first times that I heard that concept, I didn't even bother to read it the second time because I didn't think it was possible. I didn't think it was possible to have a relationship with self when it comes to all of these different areas. But now when I think about it, and a lot of it has to do due to the influences and influencers in my life that have helped me see this way, that it is possible to live a life where you can have a relationship with all these different concepts. Now I no longer laugh or judge people who choose to name some of their things, such as fears, anxiety, depression, or their inner voice. That's another thing that I'm learning right now through a book that I'm reading called The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer. One of the opening chapters, I think it is the opening chapter, in fact, he talks about how there's a difference or there's a space between yourself and your inner voice. And that oftentimes what the inner voice tells you about who you are may not ultimately be the truth about what yourself thinks of who you are. And that's where I think I've started to realize much of what we're discussing today is that everything, in my opinion, boils down to a mindset. And that is, how do I want to show up in today's world, and who am I showing up as? And how are all of these external and internal things impacting me today? How are they helping me understand my own truth? How are they helping me understand my sense of purpose, my meaning, and most importantly, to me at least, contribution? How am I being a contribution to other people's lives? What am I helping them see today that they may not have seen yesterday or the moment before? See, there's something critical, I think, that you had mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, and there's something that I choose to live by every single day. When I went to college, one of the biggest things that was passed down to me by my professors and fellow classmates was the concept of critical thinking. It wasn't necessarily a specific passage that I had memorized for a marketing test or a sales pitch or whatever it was, but it was the process to be able to put myself in situations where I can think through life, where I can think through problems, and when I can come up with a variety of solutions to any given instance. In my opinion, that's one of the most important skills of my life. And that's what I try and share with people, as you had mentioned through the podcast or whatever it might be, is simply an opportunity for people to question their own journey. Don't take things for granted and don't take things for, well, it is what it is, but rather, why is it like that? Why do you think the way you do? Why do you show up the way you do? Do you live with intention or not? And is that even important to you? And if so, what can you do differently? How can you invite more intention into your life? How can you invite more intention into your relationships? How can you invite more intention into the way that you want to experience life? These are the questions that fire me up the most, because those are the things that make me feel alive. I think if anything, that's the biggest thing I've learned, is the ability to think through my existence and not necessarily control where the thoughts are coming from or how they're going to come into my life, but more so just observe and have these conversations where I can expand my own perspective. That's what makes me feel alive at the end of the day.
Wow. What the work that you have done, what you've undertaken, it's scary, Oleg, because it calls for you to be honest. It's a constant viewing. So do you find overall, and you are a world traveler, and I'm looking at the clock, we are about to talk about what you are fitting to do in a minute with your next major adventure. But do you find in all of your conversations, 256 conversations, do you find that most people had to come to this conclusion, I have to have this come to Jesus talk with myself, and I had to do this work. The inside work had to happen. Do you find that most people are there, or we have another demographic that says, not looking at myself, I don't care, I'm going through the day to day. Oh, well, I don't care.
I think it's a combination of both. I think there are definitely people, as you described, that go from day to day and don't want to look themselves in the mirror. And then there are people who do choose to actively look themselves in the mirror. In fact, one of the biggest things that I've also learned along this journey is that I believe each and every single one of us is a mirror. So you're a reflection of myself, as well as anyone else that's listening or anyone else that I might have come across, whether it's today, tomorrow, in the upcoming weeks. I believe that each and every single one of those individuals is a reflection of what I'm feeling internally. What that helps me do is it helps me understand conflict and it helps me understand judgment. In moments where I choose to judge another individual, I try and remind myself that I'm judging that individual most likely not based on what they did or what they said, but rather the tension that I'm experiencing internally. It's an internal battle that I'm going through. And that is where the judgment comes from. Because if you really think about it, and I don't know what your experience has been like, and I'd love to hear about it. But for me, whenever I chose to judge, those were the common threads. It wasn't the fact that the person did X, Y, and Z the wrong way or said something the wrong way. It was everything with the conflict that I was experiencing internally. So that's where I think it becomes an interesting conversation for me, because the topic of judgment, as far as how do we stop it, so to speak, and that also have to understand that there are healthy components to judgment as well. We make judgments every single day. We're making judgments right now, not necessarily based on each other's appearance or anything like that, but more so there's a judgment that had to be made as far as, for your case, who do I bring on the show? Do they support the message that I'm trying to put out there? There's an internal judgment I'm sure that you make as well, as far as, am I living my truth? Am I living aligned with my message? So there's a healthy component to judgment. I think that the other component to judgment that I personally try and work on is that situations where I'm possibly putting other people down and I'm elevating myself up. And that's where I try and almost check myself and understand that, why am I judging this individual? What am I feeling internally that is creating this sense of judgment upon them? What conflict am I experiencing inside? What's not sitting well? What's not resonating with what the other individual is saying? There's a question which I think directly relates to this particular topic of judgment or relatability, that was asked in this book, The Surrender Experiment, that I'm reading right now. And that is, what is a word that you couldn't or you still can't relate to? And he brings up an example. I believe he starts with religion. So he starts with the word God. And he paints it in a way where I was able to tap into my own experiences and understand certain words within my life that I haven't been able to relate to due to either lack of experience, lack of perspectives around that, or just a lack of understanding. What does that word really mean to me? So I think what I'm trying to say with all of this is, I believe that, in my opinion, judgment is an internal conflict. It's an internal battle that is meant to be solved from within. It's not an external battle. So whenever I feel the need to judge someone, I really try and ask myself, why am I judging them?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I really judging myself? And they just happen to be a reflection of the judgment that I'm projecting onto them. So that's what I found going back to your original question, is that people, in my opinion, and maybe it's supposed to be this way because this is what creates the perspective, people are all along the way of that spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are open to growth, other people are not open to growth. And for a while, I had this desire where every single person was open to growth.
Mm.
But the beauty and the challenge of that is that what happens if you have everyone who subscribes to growth? Would growth be appreciated the same way if you weren't able to see someone else who doesn't appreciate growth, who doesn't appreciate certain elements of life? So I think if anything, that's where, going back to how we started this conversation, I believe everything in the world is great. And it's awesome that it is, because that's what allows me to create my own perspectives. One of the ways I've been able to appreciate life is by seeing people who don't appreciate life. Those people served a purpose for me. They've helped me understand the importance of appreciating some of these things in life that I come in contact with on a daily basis. The trees outside.
Gotcha.
It's fascinating to be able to, and I don't know if you do this, I have a feeling that you do. Isn't it fascinating to look at a tree and then you look at a tree right next to it and you see the birth of one and the death of the other?
Yeah.
And the cycle literally completes itself in front of your eyes. Now, if you didn't have one and you only had the other, would you ever be able to see the cycle of life?
Mm. Oh my gosh. I've seen that in people.
Mm-hmm.
I've been able to draw those parallels in people. And you're right. It provokes gratitude in me when I experience that.
Yeah.
You are a mirror for the world. And you, Oleg, are going into the world on a deep and fearless way. So will you, in these last few minutes, will you just tell everybody what your next chapter is, what your next venture is? Where are you going on this big terrestrial ball, and why?
So for me, I had a realization when I was celebrating my birthday this year in February. And that is, I chose to hike the Grand Canyon with a handful of my friends. We had quite the experience getting to the canyon to begin with, but that's a time for another story. And I remember when I was going up the canyon, I was making my way up. I had this realization about my own life and my own self-limiting beliefs of what I believe I can and can't do. And there's a beautiful quote that has been stuck in the back of my mind, and I believe it's by Henry Ford. And he said, whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you are right.
Mm.
I think the underlying message within that I choose to take away from it is that it all boils down to the story. What is the story that you are telling about your own set of circumstances? And why are you telling yourself that you can or you can't do certain things in life? And that is exactly what I experienced as I was hiking my way up the Grand Canyon. Is I started to look at life and I started to look at travel in particular through that same exact lens. See, for many years, I set so many different limitations upon myself. One of them being, I'll travel when I have enough money. I'll travel when I don't have this responsibility. I'll travel when I have this. I'll travel when I have that. Along that way up, I started to challenge all of those thoughts.
Mm.
And I started to ask myself, why can't I do this today? If it is a lack of money, which is a resource, what other ways can I manifest that resource that may not be in that monetary sense? how can I currently leverage the connections, the network that I have within my circle to create that resource that may not exist just yet? And that's the biggest realization that I had along that trip. And from that point on, I was on the way back from Phoenix to Austin. I kid you not, I pulled out my laptop on the plane and I just started to put together a plan. I started to put together a plan of all the different cultures, all the different countries that I wanted to go to. I came back home. I immediately messaged one of my friends who happened to travel through many of these places. And I asked him for help. I said, could you sit down with me and logistically break it down as far as how can I make this plan feasible? He spent 2 weeks with me, helped me break it down as far as where do I start in Europe? Where do I go to in Africa after that? How do I make my way to Japan, New Zealand, and all these other places? And throughout that experience, the other thing that I realized is the importance of being able to A, ask for help when needed, and B, knowing that that help is going to come in one way or another. It may not come in the same exact way that I envision it, but it's going to come if I put out the energy out there. That is an experience that I'm probably going to rely on for the rest of my life. Is the ability to ask for help, whether it's asking myself the help that I need internally, or it's asking other people. And I think it was through that method that I was able to put together this plan. So for anyone that's listening and you're in the regions of Portugal, Spain, Norway, Poland, Iceland, Germany, France, during the months of September through December, or different parts of Africa in January, February, or some of the other places, I'd love to connect with people. And that goes back to the why. Why am I doing this? I'm doing this because I feel a desire to learn about other people's experiences on this planet, to help myself better understand what does appreciation look like through the lens of someone else, to help myself better understand how do other people find meaning? What does purpose even mean to them? How do they develop relationship with themselves? How do they develop relationships with those surrounding them? So that's the thing that guides me moving forward. And I think beneath that, the critical element of it all is curiosity.
Yes.
I'm genuinely curious about life. I love life. I think it's a fascinating journey. I think everything in life can teach you something if you're open to it. And that is the biggest thing that I choose to remind myself every single day, is everything in life can teach you something.
I believe that. I have found that to be true. The good, the bad, what we want to call ugly.
Yeah.
Oleg Lougheed, it has been a pleasure to spend this time with you. I sense a documentary coming after all of this has been captured and placed in the perspective that that is going to come to you. How you impart that to us is going to be lovely. I'm asking, will you just stay in contact? Because every time I see a post or anything, I'm pushing it out because do you know how many, I can't count on one hand how many people I know would take on such a mission just with their why. You know, they're following and doing what they should be doing. Gosh, I told you, you're one incredible young guy. I tell you, you've living about 3 or 4 lifetimes, maybe 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 lifetimes. But I'm grateful to you for this time. Any parting words? Is it going to be arrivederci? See you in Africa, see you in Portugal, see you in Spain, or what are the parting words of Oleg Lougheed?
I think for me, what I will say is and this is in regard to the trip or living out one's why. It takes courage. It takes courage to live out the why. And the reason why is because my experience has taught me that even when I am well-intentioned with the life that I'm wanting to create for myself and other people surrounding me, not everyone wants what you want. And not everyone's intention is going to be the same as yours. So even in situations where I have the best of intentions to create this world internally and then externally, not every single person is going to meet me at that chapter. Some people may criticize you in ways that you may or may not have been able to imagine before. But the biggest thing that I'll pass on to everyone that's listening right now is to continue developing that courage. Keep going. Don't stop. If you know what's right within your heart, then that is what is meant to be contributed to the rest of the world, as well as your own world. And I know that you experience this as well. I'm sure that you've experienced this throughout your show, is that in the midst of negative feedback, negative comments, there's also an element of positivity. And that is, what can you learn from it? What are those comments maybe helping you see that you haven't seen before? And that's the biggest reminder amongst all the other things that we shared today that I try and hold within me. It's the ability to reframe. It's the ability to stay courageous throughout the process. It's the ability to tell myself that someone else's opinion doesn't have to become my reality.
Yes. Stay courageous. I hear you say, stay courageous no matter what. I want to make sure that everybody knows they can find your podcast, the Overcoming Odds podcast, over on all of the major platforms, Spotify, Apple. You are everywhere. You are global before you get on that plane. 256 episodes so a person can binge listen. So, and the TEDx talk, it's over on YouTube. Is it, how do they find that TEDx?
Yeah, or TED.com.
TED.com. All right. Wow. I could go on and on, but I don't want to. I feel as though what was supposed to happen happened today. And someone had a chance to look at things through another perspective. So I want to thank you. And I want to thank you, audience, for hanging in here. We went a few minutes over what you're normally used to, but this type of conversation is necessary. And I want you to listen again, and share it out. All right. So that you can grow, you can accept yourself. Everything that Oleg brought to the table today, you can embrace it. So I'm Margot Lougheed, Her Business, Her Voice, Her Conversation. We'll be back next week with another episode. In the meantime, you stay safe, all right? And you do you. Bye-bye. I want to thank you for listening to Her Business, Her Voice, Her Conversation. Couple of things that I want you to do right now. Go to my website, pick up a copy of Her Business, Her Voice, Her Reinvention, how I went from game show hopping to international show host, author, and speaker in 1 year. Number 2, please freely listen to each and every episode. Share them out with your family, friends, the men in your lives. And then number 3, get in contact with me, one of the experts that have been on the show, because I want to make sure that you reinvent yourself. I'll be back next week with a brand new episode here on Her Business, Her Voice, Her Conversation.